Well, good afternoon. We are so excited to see you all here for our live and in-person home garden variety trial kickoff visit. And we hope that you all have your seeds and that maybe you have some seedlings growing and that your season is off to a good start. We are kind of going to introduce ourselves. You'll hear from me at the beginning of the presentation and then Virginia, my partner in this trial project, towards the end, so that you kind of get to put some real faces behind the envelopes and the emails, and we get to see y'all as well. We want to share how this project is unique and how it connects with the other research that we do. Both of us are really kind of field crop scientists by training. So Virginia does a lot of agronomic research. My background is more fruit and vegetable production. And this is just a really fun, unique, but very much integrated project with some of the other work that we do. Then we're going to talk over the actual trials. So I actually just want to share what we're trialing this year, some of the unique elements of the trials, what we're looking at, what we're interested in as far as these cultivar trials. Then Virginia's going to talk about how we're collecting data, and then we'll answer any questions that y'all have. So here at the Land Grant University, we do stations, we do trials often on those research stations, right? So this is a picture of the East Tennessee Research and Education Center where I do a lot of vegetable trialing work, and this is kind of typical of what our university research would look like. So it's on a station, there's replicated plots, we take a lot of data, and in many ways, this is a situation that is ideal for data depth, right? But it's geographically centered. We're not really getting the whole breadth of data. Virginia actually does research on many different research stations, corn and soybean trials, but it is a large, complex, many employees, costly type of program. However, what we have the opportunity to do with this project is to pair those horticultural trials that we have maybe at one or a couple places in the site at research stations with nearly 200 of y'all across the state. And so we're able to integrate this citizen science project where you all are receiving seeds and trialing those data in your own home garden to really give us a unique and different but very much synergistic data set. So this is our 8th or ninth year of trialing. We've been doing this since 2017, which is a pilot year, and then 2018 was the first full year. And so after we build up for those first few years, we're very solidly between about 175 and 200 trialers each year. And we probably could promote bigger and have more folks that participate. However, we ourselves have limits as to how much we can ship out and pack because it really puts a lot of work in that kind of February, March time period. So we're really excited about how we have a good swath of participants and counties across the state to really get as much specific data and geographical variability as we possibly can. We, of course, love to collect data, but the most important part of this project is that we are, in fact, sharing that data. And so all of it can be found on our uthort.com website. So, for instance, this is a screenshot that I just took today. And if you go to the vegetable and herb tab under garden establishment, you can clearly see all of last year's home garden variety trial there. Virginia really leads the charge in running the data analysis, and we work together to prepare that publication that has the trial results. So we want to get it to y'all as trialers first, but we share it with everybody throughout the state. So this is, for instance, what the cover of the publication looks like. I've already sent it out to a lot of our trialers, so hopefully you've gotten that in the emails that you have. So this is a yearly trial. We always give lots of data on the cultivars that we're trialing within that year. So for instance, this was the 2024 bush bean trial where we had Buff Valentine, also known as Contender, and Magnum. And you can see here the recommendation rate, the overall rating, all of these different factors that they're being rated on, and kind of why it is that people really liked these different cultivars. So yield really came out on top for Magnum, whereas flavor was the highest for the Contender or the Buff Valentine. So these different attributes for different cultivars are able to really be demonstrated. Then at the end of the trial publication, every year we compile this list of our top recommended varieties. And so over the years that we've been doing this, we really have now a nice list of some of the favorites that have been trialed across the state of Tennessee. You can see your own citizen science ratings for those and recommendation percentage, as well as why we love those vegetable cultivars, as well as flowers and herbs, of course. So this is always an ever-expanding list, but it's always at the back of each year's trial publication. And before I really jump into this year's trials, I just want to say your engagement in this project enables us as researchers, as applied researchers, to do what we cannot do on our own simply by using our more traditional methods of doing in-field studies at research stations. So you enable evaluations all across the entire state, as you saw by the map. You also enable those results to come from varied systems and environmental conditions. Here we have a very traditional East Tennessee red clay soil, open field conditions. This is what my trial plot looks like before it gets planted. However, you may be growing in much more, say, container or raised bed types of conditions, and you enable us to evaluate these cultivars in a whole range of conditions. And you give us feedback that we don't get just by counting and weighing. So things like, how long did that okra stay tender on the plant before it became too tough to use? Or were these beans really great for sauteing, but I just didn't like them as well when they were canned, etc., right? All of those types of very important from the consumer perspective, but not typical questions that we ask on a research scale. And you also help us to know you all as stakeholders and as gardeners better. And so we can continue to tailor our recommendations and really our extension outreach, right? Because we're both extension specialists, we have statewide responsibilities. And so I kind of use you all as the test audience, right? As the sample size for the types of materials that we need to really reach broader gardening audiences in the state of Tennessee. For instance, this is last year's numbers from our home garden variety trial. You can see over that about 58% of folks were not growing in a traditional in-ground garden. So call it 40%. Well, this has been a switch over the years that we have done this trial. When we first started, it was a solid 60 or so percent that were growing in a traditional garden. So we're seeing a more small scale, more small space, more container raised bed type of audience, which means, right, that we need to continue to develop resources to meet those needs. We actually have a brand new set of container and raised bed gardening, small space gardening pubs that just came out today. So you're kind of our needs assessment as well. Things like how people are managing, what types of fertilizers you're using. We want to make sure that our educational outreach material is in fact meeting the needs of the way that people are growing. So this year we have 17 different trials, which I'll run through here, hopefully briefly, but to share some of the important attributes that we are interested in looking at. And there are 195 trialers, which we're really excited to work with over the course of this year. So our trial number 1 is bush beans. This is always one of our most widely grown trials. The cultivars that we'll be trialing are Desperado, there on the left, as well as green crop on the right. And what we have here, of course, both bush beans, but Desperado can be grown for commercial as well as home garden consumer types of applications. And it tends to bear its beans up close to the top, right? So the goal is easy picking, whereas the green crop a little bit more traditional. And we just want to look at things like ease of picking, right? Bean size, characteristics, stringiness or not stringiness, toughness on the vine, and of course, flavor, the most important attribute for our beans. Our trial number 2 is a specialty bean. So we have the Celine, which is a purple filet bean, just a really beautiful shot there. And we're comparing that with another interesting specialty bean. Now, these are both bush beans, but Flambeau is a kind of pink speckled bean. And you can see both the pod and the bean itself have that really interesting color appearance. And while the Celine is more of a traditional snap bean. Flambeau can be dried, it can be shelled, it's much more of a versatile bean. So we're interested in, of course, the yield, but also the flavor and the taste and how you all used this bean and what you found it to be desirable or undesirable about it. Okra, always one of our most trialed crops. In fact, okra was the seed that I ran out of before anything else in this year's trial. And last year we did dwarf okra, but this year we have full statured plants again. And both of these are about 50 to 55 days to harvest. That's jambalaya there on the left. And that is actually a picture of jambalaya 1.0, which we grew in the trial a few years ago. And we have not grown Perkins long. So that's a brand new one. And of course, we haven't grown jambalaya 2.0. So this is kind of an heirloom in the Perkins with a hybrid in the jambalaya 2.0. And so we're interested in holding quality of that pod on the plant, taste, texture, yield, those types of attributes. Now, this is a fun one. Sugar cube we've grown before, but Tigger is a brand new crop. And this was actually suggested by one of our home garden variety trialers. And so both of these are about 80 or a few days less to harvest. And you can see there's just a very different type of melon. Both of these are smaller melons. Now the Tigger is going to be smaller than the sugar cube is, and the sugar cube has a little bit more disease resistance with fusarium and powdery mildew resistance there. So we're just interested in kind of the fruit number, what that yield looked like, as well as notes on texture, taste, aroma, kind of ripening speed and holding quality. So there's all kinds of fun stuff that we look forward to with this melon. We had a very good participation rate for melons. Oftentimes that's one that, because they're rather space consumptive, aren't a huge trialer number. Now we always have good participation on cucumbers, and we've had several solid years of growing burpless cucumbers. So this is the burpless trial for this year. It is Summer Dance and Tasty Jade. These are both cultivars that we haven't grown before, and so they're both in that 55 to 65 days to harvest. They don't have quite the disease resistance profile as some of our newest slicers, but not bad. And so we're very much interested in plant health as well as harvest timing, and definitely fruit number, fruit yield, and fruit quality, because in the hot summers that we have had, we definitely saw some instances last year of these thinner skinned, low bitterness, burpless cucumbers really coming out well on the taste end of things, when some of our more traditional slicers were really becoming bitter with the very high heat. And so that leads us to our more traditional slicer cucumber trial, which is trial number 6. Now, these are going to be compact plants, and we have Salamore on the left and Space Master on the right. So just about 55 to 60 days to harvest. And of course, there's going to be a little bit of difference in their disease resistance profile, which we're very much interested in, and certainly harvest duration, quality, and flavor. So this year, we kind of just decided to do a somewhat thematic year, and we're going to call this the year of the tomato, because trials 7, 8, and 9 are all tomatoes. In years past, we've kind of worried about doing a lot of tomatoes because you have to start transplants, and it adds in an additional potential area of kind of uncertainty. But hey, y'all are experienced. Let's just grow some tomatoes and see how it goes. So the first one is a yellow indeterminate trial. So we have a newer hybrid and then an open pollinated Valencia. Both of these I've grown in my own trials here in Knoxville in years past. And so they both kind of have different attributes as far as size, firmness. And so, of course, we're just interested in duration and yield and texture and absolutely eating quality.
And I
So
just
that
add in, be sure to send us pictures if you have any good pictures, because these look like they would make a great cover photo for our report.
yeah,
Or that
yeah,
Tigger melon. It's adorable.
yes, yeah, Tiggers and Chef's Choice. We're all up for the oranges and the gold photos. We'll do an all vol trial report next year with pictures of all the orange stuff. So we do kind of a yellow-orange selection for our indeterminates, and then I say determinate, which is true, but actually Celebrity and Marglobe are both semi-determinate. So these can grow in raised beds, they can grow in soil if you're going to put them in a container, put them in a big container because these are going to be slightly larger than your typical determinant. And I always say that I always do my determinant trials to see if anything can beat Celebrity, which was a 1984 selection. And then Marglobe is a little bit older than that. So we're kind of looking at two similar semi-determinants, but with maybe about 50 years or so of breeding difference in those. So Marglobe was one of the cultivars that we always sold a lot in the greenhouse where I worked as a kid growing up. So hopefully these might be kind of familiar selections to you. And then if all of those are bigger than you would like for your container, for your raised bed, our number 9 trial are even more compact determinant plants. So Tasmanian chocolate is that image there on the top right. And it is actually has heirloom parents, but it itself is a hybrid. And so it almost looks like a dwarf tomato. Now it's going to get bigger than 10 inches. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise, but it's it's going to be a couple foot tall plant. Sunrise sauce is a determinate plum tomato, which we're just interested to see how kind of the different stature and the architecture of these plants grow for everybody. So that bottom picture there are my tomato transplants in the greenhouse yesterday. Tasmanian chocolates on the left there, you can kind of see that squatty, shorter statured plant with sunrise sauce being a little bit larger plant there on the right. So I'm getting ready to go out in the plots within the next 10 days or 2 weeks. Then, of course, we're always going to have a typical green zucchini. These are actually both new cultivars that we've never trialed before. And if you've noticed in the past, this is always one of my secrets. I try to have slight physical differences. So you can see Sophie there on the right is like a Romano type, going to have a little bit of stripes, whereas Kefren is going to be one of our pretty traditional dark green zucchini. So we're always interested in yield, flavor, and texture. We got some really good comments last year on some of kind of the textural differences between the fruit. So that's always excellent. And then our number 11 trial, definitely going to be some yellow squash. Oftentimes we see slightly higher yield in our yellow squash than we do the zucchini due to the harvest duration. So these are both new cultivars that we have never trialed before. So we're always interested to see how these new types stack up against what we have seen in the past. Now we get to some fun and novel stuff. We have, for our flower trial this year, 2 native species. So this is Rudbeckia hirta and Rudbeckia triloba. And these are my transplants that are growing in the greenhouse right now. And so they're actually different rows of those 2 different species. Rudbeckia hirta is actually the cultivar Indian summer, whereas Rudbeckia triloba is actually kind of the straight species, but these are both species that are native to Tennessee. And we're interested to see how big the plants get. How well do they bloom in the first year and those types of things, because we've never really kind of grown a wildflower type before. So flower number, timing, ease of germination. I'll include one additional thought. When you read about these, you got lots of information about, well, maybe we need some stratification types of procedures. Do we need to cool our seed and things like that? Well, I'll tell you what, I just put them in the tray and they germinated in like 36 hours. So I didn't actually do any special seed treatment when I seeded these. And those are the types of things, I'm just curious how germination went, if people ran into any issues and things like that. So we're always interested in that. Basil, we always love doing basil. This is kind of an early run of basil that I put in the greenhouse, so I'd have some early pictures. And you can see a little bit there. The Emerald Towers is the tray on the left, and you can see a taller, slender plant there, whereas Prospera is there on the right. So we kind of have a more compact plant, and we have a more slender, columnar type. Both of these are listed to have pretty good resistance to Fusarium, to downy mildew. So we're interested in stature, in time to bloom, and all of those sorts of factors. Then for our second herb, we did a cool season herb. It's been a few years since we've done any chives, and so this is once again pictures from my trial in the greenhouse yesterday. You can see the basil is big and exciting, and the chives are not very exciting yet, but they're on their way. One of these Dolores is a more traditional round type of chives, whereas Nira is a little bit more of a flat leaf garlic chives type. So, some slight differences there, and we'll see how the yield and the productivity, how long does it take to bloom, all of those sorts of things. And then we have two cool season crops, which I hope are already growing, or you may decide to do a late season planting. But we have a green lettuce, so that is Muir on the left, and then Gatsby on the right. So you can see a summer crisp type for Muir. Gatsby is a little bit more of a bib type. So of course we're interested in size and leaf texture and preference, things like that. But also, was one of them stronger against bolting, those types of things. And then our second cool season crop is radishes. And we have a traditional globe type and a longer French breakfast type. So, of course, we're just interested in, you know, textural quality, taste quality of those radishes, and whether you grew them as a fall or whether you grew them as a spring. And then the final trial that we had was this is a new record. We had 4 tomatoes this year, and our youth trial was a red cherry and a gold or a yellow cherry, but these are both determinate plants, so hopefully they would be able to be grown in a container or or a small space, and hopefully our youngest participants will enjoy some great snacking. So that is the quick rundown of our trial, and now I'll flip the mic back to Virginia to talk about the data.
Yeah, Natalie gets to talk about the fun stuff with all the different plants, and I get to talk about data. So what are we going to actually do with this? So in order to get that report and be able to make recommendations, we do need people who are participating in the trial to get that data back to us. It's really important for putting together that report so we can make recommendations and give presentations across the state. So some key things to remember. You were assigned a trialer number. It's important to remember that number because that is how we keep track of our evaluation forms throughout the season. And again, this year, we're going to have 2 evaluations instead of 1. So when we first started this trial, we did have a single evaluation sheet. It was tricky for people to remember how did things germinate at the beginning of the year when they were filling this out all the way at the end of the year. And so we've split that up. So we have 2 evaluation forms as well as a record keeping sheet that should have been sent to you with your trial. So this is the record keeping sheet where you can just track that information as you go along. And it just has some of the information that's later going to be entered online. We do collect all of our data online now. We don't have those forms mailed in. It makes it a lot easier on us when we're trying to analyze that data rather than having, hundreds of envelopes coming in the mail. So you'll put your trialer number in there. Really important to put your county as well, because we do like to make that map to show where all of our different trials are. And then you'll select your trial. And this is also a really important thing. Make sure that you are evaluating the correct trial. So select that trial there. So mid-season, what we're going to evaluate are those sort of early season characteristics, what things germinated best, what germinated fastest, what was healthiest, what produced the first fruit and flower. And it's really simple. You're just going to click whether it was cultivar number 1 or cultivar number 2, or whether they were the same and you didn't see any differences. And I think on the actual form, it's going to have cultivar names up there at the top, right, Natalie? Yes. So we'll have those cultivar names so that you'll know exactly which one you're voting for. Then you can say whether there were any issues with seeding or germination that prevented that data. And this is really important too, because we have found that people often don't want to fill out the form if they had a crop failure. But having that information about the crop failure is really important to us so that we know, did you actually plant the trial? And then we can kind of determine what things are preventing certain crops from growing. Like we've had issues with, I think it was carrots in previous years, where it was germination. It was not anybody's fault. It was definitely the varieties that we had. We were having issues with that carrot germination. So this is really important for us as we pick what vegetables we want to trial in the future and pick those varieties within there. And then how did you grow those plants and how did you fertilize them? When we get to the end of the season, this is where you're going to evaluate things like yield. So how much total did you get? Which had the longest production season? And what did it look like? And what did it taste like? So these are the fun ones, I think the end of the season ones. But be sure to do both forms because they're both important. And then how many days were there from seeding or transplant? This is where having that record page is really important because this is a thing to easily forget. So if you've written down when you planted those, and then you can write down the first harvest date, then it's a lot easier to fill this form out later. And then here's where you're going to rate your overall performance. So the previous section, you were just comparing, like this is better than this. And this one, you're actually going to say on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the best, how would you rate this specific variety? And you're going to have that for each of those different varieties in the trial. And then would you recommend it? And why specifically would you recommend it? And that's where we get those percentages so that when we make recommendations to our neighbors or to people across the state, we can say, this is why we like that specific variety, or I wouldn't recommend this. I don't think we should grow this. And then, of course, the comments that we can incorporate later about just interesting things. We've had stuff about things being better for canning or that they won a state fair prize. And it's just always fun to have those little comments in there.
And thank you for being a valued home garden variety trialer. This is truly one of the most fun projects that we do, getting to work with all of you. So thanks for joining in. And any questions or anything that you have, by all means, you let us know and have a great rest of your day and rest of your week, everybody.